Welcome back. I've got Wayne Yu on the line. Wayne, how are you?
I'm very good, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because you do some amazing work, and we're going to talk about leadership and neurodiversity. So, why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yeah, I'll start by just sharing one dimension of myself, which is I think the most sort of well understood, which is that I'm a leader in one of the technology companies out here in the West Coast. It's a one of the larger ones. But I think the more interesting parts of me are a few other dimensions that are actually interconnected, and I'll share them in the sequence in which they actually emerged in my life. The first one is that I am the father of four kids, and two of whom are neurodivergent, and the other two are too early to tell, I say, because they're 5 and 3. Um, and that's sort of my entry point into the world of neurodivergence. What you'll find out is that, what I found out at least, is that neurodivergence is often genetic. And so I learned about my own traits as part of learning about my own children's traits. And I found that they were not only things that I struggled with growing up, but they were also things that made me who I am and made me successful in my current role as a leader and executive. Um, Out of that, I've also become a better manager. So I'm a neurodivergent father, a neurodivergent leader, and now I'm a better manager, not just of people in my teams and my organizations who might have cognitive diversity, but also of others, just, a better manager in general. Finally, I've become a leadership coach, and I often help people who are struggling through burnout or wanting to see what's next for them. And about 50% of the people I support have some level of cognitive diversity. And finally, I do academic research in this field as well, in the intersection of leadership, creativity, and neurodivergence. That's a bit about me, Michael.
It's amazing work that you're doing, and I also do a lot of work in the burnout space, and the cognitive diversity side of things is really critically important, I think, because it's how we approach people. And my youngest child is autism, and as we shared before we hit record, my spouse is neurodivergent as well, and understanding that and leaning into it and seeking to understand more about neurodiversity, and more importantly, okay, what can I do as an individual to create an environment that is supportive of whatever they need, or understanding just how to interact or how to respond or not respond or whatever the case may be. But one of the things that it's done for me is I reflect back to my ancestors and family members that have since passed, and just interactions with them. And I have a cousin that's a little bit older than me that is neurodivergent, and we've known that as long as I've known him. Like I said, he's a few years older than me, so it's always been that, and love spending time with him growing up, and because the experience was different, and I leaned into it, where as we know, the stigmatism with mental health and all that for way too long has been inappropriate, but now it's starting to open, and I think people are discovering more. But getting back to just thinking about ancestors and family members and things like that, it's like, okay, my uncle, one of my uncles, I'm willing to bet that he had, some, traits or was neurodivergent, but it was never diagnosed. And just based on just behaviors that I see of other people that I know, that have, different, as you mentioned in the pre-show, or pre-show, the soup. And I think back to that and I'm like, huh. And part of me is like, oh, I like the awareness of it. But then there's another part of me that just, I guess, personally, I feel kind of sad because I'm like, if they would have had access and understanding to different, ways to, navigate and create a world that makes them feel comfortable, and whatever that looks like, I wonder if things would have been different. And it's just, I think about that. But I guess the important work is, especially with the work that you're doing, is again, studying it, bringing more awareness to it, and creating places of that work to say, okay, here's how we navigate this. Just completely out of the blue. I literally had a phone call with my wife, about 10 minutes before our chat today. And she was talking about how one of her coworkers, was trying to explain to management on, you need to remember that my wife has this and this. So you understand that's why they're going to react or not react the way that you would think that they would. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, one of the things, so I grew up, so my mom was the 13th, I think, of 14 kids, and I'm the youngest of three brothers. And so I was always the youngest in the broader family. And so I didn't really see people when they were in the younger ages growing up. And so I developed this assumption that people were born roughly the same. And they become who they become through their life experiences. That was just my worldview. By the way, this is kind of a well, there's a lot of people who believe this as well. In fact, Aristotle, who's one of the popular philosophers, has a term for it called tabula rasa. So everybody's born a blank slate. And I realized, having been through the journey I've been through so far, that that is in fact not true. There, in the nature and nurture balance, there is actually quite a bit that comes from nature, the things that you're born with, and you're born very differently. That forms a big part of you. Or obviously, there's a lot that you gain through your experiences as well. Not minimizing that, but I think we sort of, in various circles, we underplay how individuals are just different, and they may be wired differently. They might have different beliefs and different values, and that is something you should lean into rather than want to change. And so that's one of the biggest things that I've started to learn, both as a parent and as a leader, rather than trying to have this view of what is the ideal child or what is the ideal employee and try to get everybody to live up to the ideal. I've moved to a mindset of understanding, like, who is this person that is in front of me, and how do I understand what they're really good at, and how do I leverage that for whatever, whether it's, if it's child, then for their life, and if it's an employee, then for the good of the organization that they belong to. And so often the conversation with neurodiversity is often one about accommodations, right? How do we accommodate their, uh, I'll use the term deficiencies. But there's an equal amount of focus, I think, that needs to be put into understanding the things that they are good at, and then having those be a big part of how they show up every day.
As you were talking, I was thinking about, society likes to put things in boxes and sort things. And I had a thought of a record store. It's like, okay, here, this is where the jazz is, this is where the country is, this is where the classical is, here's the rock, here's the pop, and things like that. And we are so dynamic that, yeah, there might be part of us that would be, yeah, they could fit in rock, but you know what? It also sounds kind of bluesy, so it could be blues. Okay, and we want to, and I think we put it there. It's like, okay, so that way we use this lens to interact with you. And I think that's something that is shortchanging people. It's like, no, just treat the individual as an individual, and learn, okay, how would they like me to interact with them? How, what can I do to make our interactions positive in whatever we're doing, whether it's a work relationship or personal relationship or interaction at the grocery store. And yeah, I'll see, like, if I'm at the store with my spouse and we encounter, a cashier or a clerk or something like that, and yeah, I'll notice, I mean, she knows it right away, I'll notice and, like, okay, I think they might be neurodivergent, is because my wife, who's introverted, all of a sudden becomes like poster child extrovert, and they're both, communicating with each other and excited and happy. It's like they found their people. I just kind of take a step back and I'm like, I'm gonna, I'm just gonna witness this and be present and not interject unless I'm asked to. I enjoy this interaction, because they feel comfortable and they feel a sense of belonging. They feel heard. The combination of things. And I look at that and I go, okay, how do we do that more and more in our world? Because as we all know, in this world right now, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of, at least from a leadership standpoint,
Yeah.
enough leading and enough listening. They're just kind of going down a path and not paying attention to anything or anyone, and they're just doing what they want to do. And I'm not trying to stay completely out of politics, but that's a great example of it. We see it across the planet, not
Yeah.
just in the continental, but we definitely see it, and it's like you could be missing the boat here on something. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this reminded me of this. You're talking about respecting the individual, which most people find that to be reasonably easy to do if the differences are modest, right? There's all these modest differences across people, and as long as you're in the range of 10 to 15% different, it's relatively easy to accept. I think the thing about neurodivergent people is that they can sometimes be 50 to 100% different at certain dimensions of the way they show up. And that's when it really starts to be difficult, um, at least more difficult to accept. And I'll give you one example of an employee I had before, and I didn't actually know he had ADHD, but I didn't actually know this at the time I was managing him. I found out like years later. Initially, when I met him, he was really struggling on a project we were working on together, and it was about customer support, classic customer support, really a strong focus on getting the details right, putting in really rigorous processes. Things needed to be done like clockwork. And he just couldn't do the job. Like he was just unmotivated. He just couldn't seem to wrap his head around it. And we were all wondering like what's so hard about this? It seems like this should be something you can do. And so he was really trending downwards in performance. Eventually the project concluded, and so he had to be moved to a different project, and his performance turned around 180 degrees. Massive shift. And looking back, I realized that the nature of the jobs were just very different. The customer service job was how do you get something that was 99% good to 99.99% good? It was like just the final mile kind of thing. And he moved to a different role that was really about focusing on how do you get from 20% to 80% using some really, really hard technology and science. And for him, that was just incredibly motivating. Like he liked the science part, he liked the technology part, he liked the fact that the improvements were step change, like it meant a big deal to him. And his performance just turned around. He got promoted in that role shortly thereafter, and he just did really well. Same person. The only thing that changed what his role was. And your story about the grocery store and the records just reminded me that um, we just have to be willing to hold judgment a little bit and understand the person a bit deeper to find these things. And I think sometimes those very cursory, quick judgments can lead us the wrong way.
Yeah, our instant society, we want to come up with a solution immediately. And yeah, I use the analogy, okay, you're making a stew or a chili or a soup. It's our second soup analogy today. Okay, you put the ingredients in, you don't just start eating it. You need to let it marinate. You need to let it cook. You need to let all of the ingredients work together to come up with a soup. And as we know, like with stews and chilies and soups and things like that, usually the second day it tastes better. Why? Because it's had time to kind of congeal with each other. And I think society could learn a big lesson with that because we're so quick to make an assessment because we feel this pressure to respond quickly. And I know leaders run into this all the time. Someone asks a question, you feel pressured. I have to give an answer right now because they're afraid to say, I don't know yet. Let me look into that. And the more confident you are, you can say, let me look into that. I will get back to you. And you can set a soft target. I will get back to you by the end of today. Or, a client, they had requested something. I said, you'll hear back from me at the latest end of business day, Wednesday. Am I going to be able to turn it around quicker than that? Probably. But I'm like, let me just kind of level set some expectations here because it's a new engagement. And I'm like, I don't want them to think, snap, and I can magically create it. Could I? Potentially. But I also want to take the time to actually look at what they asked to do it right the first time instead of, oh, missed that, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. And I love the example you gave about your colleague on how some people thrive in certain things because they saw that 20 to 80% jump and like, wow, I can make a big impact. But 99 to 99.9, that is it a big deal? Of course. I mean, it's not something to say no, because you, if it wasn't worth doing, you wouldn't have asked for that type of improvement. But going from 20 to 80% and they get there, oh yeah, that's going to make a big adjustment. That's going to people are going to recognize, wow, that was a huge accomplishment. Congratulations, here's a promotion. Well, no kidding. Most companies, I think, would look at that. It's like, because that is a huge, huge thing. But again, it's finding out what people love to do. What lights them up, what really brings the best out of them, where the basically I don't want to say tunnel vision, but it more or less, they get so focused into it that the whole world could be doing who knows what,
Yeah.
but they're not hearing it. They're not paying attention because they're focused on something that they truly love and enjoy doing, and they're lit up by the process. And when they do that, when you see that in organizations and you can find each of your people to get into that zone, whatever that is for them, step back and observe and enjoy, magic, quite frankly, happening, because it's like, oh, this is beautiful to watch. It's beautiful to witness. Of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the in the literature you might find that called hyperfocus, and it's actually it's both considered a weakness and a strength. People with ADHD tend to have hyperfocus, meaning if it's an area of strong interest, they can not only can they pay attention to it, they don't have an attention deficit. Not only can they pay like good enough attention, they can pay 10x more attention to it than a normal person would be able to, because it's so interesting to them. And you can think of that as a strength. Although if you're in a environment like a school or an organization where people move your attention frequently, you're told like, okay, work on A now, 30 minutes later, work on B, 30 minutes later work on C, like schools are notorious for this type of thing. Then whenever your attention is grabbed by something, someone else is trying to pull you away from it, and that's really hard. And in the positive psychology literature, it's often called flow, the state of being so engrossed with what you're doing that it is highly correlated to this feeling of joy and happiness and fulfillment. And so, yeah, that resonates a lot. The other thing that you were talking about, Michael, was with processing speed. In I don't know if you've done IQ tests recently, but in tests of IQ, there's multiple different subparameters to it. One of them is called fluid reasoning, which means are you able to deal with novel problems, solve novel problems? And it's a different thing from processing speed, which is can you just do it quickly? And I really feel sad for the kids who have this profile, which is they're very, very, very gifted in fluid reasoning, but they have very, very slow processing speed. And one of my kids actually has this profile because they often feel like they're dumb. Because to them, smart is you're the first one to have your hand up, you have the answer right away, you finish the test in 15 minutes. Like that's the view of intelligence in most environments versus I'm given a new problem and I can solve it in new ways. And this is just as a leader in an organization, you just have to be careful about the how you're viewing people based on certain characteristics, which isn't actually the characteristic you need. Like you need people who can solve new problems, not just people who can give you an answer quickly.
Yeah, I've said this on my show a lot. My favorite leadership book of all time is The Tortoise and the Hare. And who wins the race? The turtle. Because the rabbit's going fast, running around, da, 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 and who crosses the finish line first? Tortoise. Because they were methodical, they had all the right answers, they studied the course, they did everything, they knew how to win. And you mentioned processing speed. This is something that my spouse, it's probably the most I've ever talked about her on my show. She's going to want royalties from this. But she discovered she loves reading, but she's one of the things she's struggled with sometimes is being able to read for longer periods of time. And then, in her research, she came across what she calls, and I don't know if this is the official term or not, or if this is something that she created, but I think it might be. On her e-reader, she downloaded what they call the dyslexic font, and she installed that on there. She's flying through books. She's reading books faster than I can read books, and she's having the time of her life. She's going through all of these huge novels of stories and things like that she loves, and she's flying through them. And I asked her, so how many books did you read this week? And she's like, oh, two. I'm like, okay. Most people don't read a book a year. You did a couple in a week. And she's like, I didn't do it every night. I'm like, okay. It's like so that font is working for you. And again, it's going back to that employee that did the 20 to 80%. It's like you find the sweet spot for people. I mean, whatever that is, when you can do that, it's a game changer for them, for the company, for everybody else. And I think as leaders, we need to take a longer look at, okay, is the workplace, the way that we have it set up, working for you? And that is not a singular answer going, yeah, it's good. No, I mean, literally figure that out. Spend the time, because that investment is going to make a huge, huge impact. If you configure people's workplaces and how the tools they use and all of that for them to be the best that they can be, where they enjoy it and it's not a burden for them, it's magical to watch that, and it's easy to do. And I implore organizations and leaders to do that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
I got stuck with this fun fact I want to share with you, Michael, on that dyslexic font, because I used to work on e-reading and fonts. So there's this thing called kerning and ligatures. Basically, if you have the letter I is basically like a stroke that goes this way, like up, down. There's a bunch of fonts out there that add a bunch of frills to that. Like, there's a little curve at the bottom, there's a little curve at the top, maybe it's a little italicized. Like, we complexify all sorts of fonts. And for some minds, all that is just noise. I'm trying to decode in my brain, is it a letter I or is it not a letter I? And you're throwing at me all this additional information that's just not helpful. And so part of the magic with dyslexic fonts is just simplifies things down to what the mind can easily absorb. And that's all over us. Like that this type of sort of designs built and that we followed for many years and haven't really gone back to think about them, exists all over the workplace. It exists all over schools. And like you said, it's helpful, I think, if we just take a bit of a step back and understand, like, what is the job that we're trying to accomplish here? And how can we use the resources we have, human resources we have, to go get that job done? And maybe question some of the how, like some of the how elements are not really necessary. Like if you need to read a book, it's really not necessary that you have all that fancy fonts, maybe is a simple word for it. Maybe a simpler font would do.
Yeah, it's just figuring out, what works for somebody may not work for somebody else. And, you know, from accessibility, we've gone a long way to make sure that, you know, doors and working environments and desks and all that are ergonomically set for people that have mobility issues so they can work. We need to do the same thing from a cognitive standpoint. And yes, it's still early days in the grand scheme of things, but it's important work and we need to do it. And if it takes legislation to make it happen, so be it. I'd much rather have organizations do it on their own instead of have it be legislatively driven. But whatever it takes, because when you create environments for people to be in their optimum best, a tweak here, a tweak there, and all of a sudden you get performance like you wouldn't imagine. What does that do for companies? It retains people, you bring in more people, you do great things, you survive all these ups and downs that we've seen over these last at least 6 years, if not longer. It's been a rocky ride for so many of us. And I think when organizations open things up and become more aware of, the needs and the strengths of their people, the better work and better products and services that you and I are going to receive from that. I often think about organizations that are no longer around. What did we lose with that? Not just a company and not just people losing their jobs, but what did we lose as far as a product or a service that could really impact humanity? And there's countless stories of that. And the more that we can do to prevent that from happening on a mass scale, the better we're all going to be.
Absolutely, Michael. And on your point about strengths, for ADHD in particular, people use the terms distractible and impulsive as two different adjectives to describe people with ADHD. And you could just take those terms and look at them more positively. Distractible is curious. ADHD people are incredibly curious because they want to go. Their mind is always searching for something that ignites their interest. And impulsive is just courageous. That's sort of why people with ADHD tend to be more overrepresented in entrepreneurship, for example, because they tend to jump before they think, which, there's definitely times when that can backfire. But there's also times when a lot of rationalization and thinking and overthinking just doesn't lead to results. And sometimes you just need to take that leap of faith. And some of these types of people are more likely to take that leap of faith than others. So I just agree with your point about looking at the strengths, not just the deficiencies.
Absolutely. And again, it makes our workplaces, quite frankly, more rich when we have dynamic people of all shapes and sizes and backgrounds and cultures and mental capabilities, physical capabilities. It just makes because that's what our world is. So let's make our workplaces more worldly, both from a physical, cultural, and mental state. So, Wayne, I've loved this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and this amazing work you're doing?
Yeah, I think the best place to find me, Michael, are either on LinkedIn or on my own website. So my name is Wainwright Yu. That's spelled WAINWRIGHT. That's my first name, and then YU, two letters, is my last name. So find me on LinkedIn or wainwrightu.com.
I'll definitely have that in the show notes. So, Wayne, appreciate your time today. Thank you for all this amazing work you're doing. Really appreciate our time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.